They believed it would depart the nation in silence and without being examined. Just a diplomatic shipment, protected by foreign immunity, traveling in the middle of the night. However, the contents were not typical. An emerald tiara, a ruby brooch, and precious royal history were transported under Camilla, the Queen Consort's own exclusive trust, and were the personal jewels of the late Queen Elizabeth. But because one royal guard discovered the whole scheme, intervened at the last second, and halted it by himself, the shipment never entered British territory. Before we show you how he stopped the plane, opened the package, and confronted Camilla, please make sure you have the bell icon switched on and subscribed. Then, leave a comment letting us know where in the world you are watching from. Let's get started, if you're prepared to learn the truth about the crown. It never felt like the rest of the airport to be in the diplomatic cargo wing at Heathrow. This basement realm hummed with a strange energy, clinical and chilly, where every door needed clearance and every mistake terminated livelihoods. As travelers hurried through terminals above, during his 20 years of duty, Sergeant Ellis Renick had gotten to know this place. Coldstream Guard, who had previously been assigned to Queen Elizabeth's diplomatic escort, was now temporarily transferred to outbound logistics. Someone had to keep an eye on what left the nation under Crown seal, even though it wasn't ceremonial work. A matte black diplomatic container on a carbon-reinforced trolley, guarded by 2 Austrian security contractors wearing pricey suits, rolled past him at 3:42 a.m., causing his chest to clench, the type of arrangement that transferred cultural property protected by the Vienna Convention, items that were not allowed to be opened, questioned, or postponed. Renick, however, was familiar with Subchamber and Strela International Logistics, the courier service. Last year, he had reported them for removing questionable items from Balmoral. That inquiry had silently vanished into the records. It was more than identification that drove him to follow the container. The weight distribution was the cause. He'd worked with royal relics for 20 years, so he knew how valuable things moved. This container was too heavy for domestic items, but too light for paperwork. Whatever was within had been packed by someone who recognized the fragility of priceless items, judging by the way it rested on the cart and the careful balance. He committed the faces of the Austrian contractors to memory, saw how they positioned themselves to prevent anyone from approaching the manifest too closely, and took note of how they avoided making eye contact with airport security. Professional smugglers were undetectable, not anxious. He moved in closer to read the manifest that was clipped to the side of the container. Declared contents: non-commercial family memorabilia. Shipper, Windsor Subchamber 6 of origin, Avon Holiday Trust, Vienna, is the recipient. His mouth clenched. Subchamber 6 in Windsor wasn't your average storage space. It included Queen Elizabeth's personal belongings, which had not been touched since the funeral, and were preserved under regal seal. He had been standing watch outside that room for 3 months in a row, so he knew. The container itself also appeared familiar. The seal tabs, the thin residue around the sides, and that specific taper of the pressure lock. When the Queen's sapphire necklace was temporarily put on display following Philip's funeral, he had witnessed this identical packaging. But this time there was only a coded courier, a blacked-out manifest, and the kind of silence that indicated someone in a position of authority didn't want inquiries. There was no display, registry listing, or catalog of outgoing items. It was not Ellis Renick's style to talk without evidence. He knew someone had to ask the questions no one else was ready to ask, though, as he watched those men in fitted suits wheel what appeared to be stolen history toward an aircraft hold. He took out his encrypted gadget and texted Maradors, the Royal Collections Registrar. 6 words: check Subchamber 6 off the record. After witnessing a fragment of British history vanish into the night while standing at the runway's edge, he concluded that this was no longer ceremonial. The following morning, Renick was moving through Windsor's Royal Collection wing, with the type of focused urgency that came from sleeping poorly and thinking worse, by the time the rain had soaked through his collar. With her sleeves pulled up and wire-frame spectacles resting low on her nose, Maradors waited just inside the inner archive doorway. After 25 years as registrar, she was able to recall which boxes the Queen herself had sealed and which ones shouldn't have been moved without her express permission. She exclaimed, "Something's very wrong," before he even questioned her. There was a subtle scent of cedar polish and ancient secrets in the climate-controlled hallway. After passing velvet-draped vaults and oil portraits, Maradors ushered him into a private records room where digital and analog logs were arranged on an old-fashioned desk. Subchamber 6 shows no withdrawals for months, she stated while looking through a ledger made of black leather. She turned the book to face him and said, "Until this date, 3 weeks ago, external safeguarding is the course of action. International display is still waiting. CW22 is the authorization code." Renick blinked. That code's been dormant since 2004. Maradors took out another ledger after giving a stern nod. She dragged her finger down a column of dates and opened to a section labeled Unusual Access Logs, saying, "That's not the worst part. Look at this." Renick felt a chill creep across his chest 6 times. This code has been reactivated 6 times in the past 8 months. Small withdrawals, different items each time, all logged as conservation review or archival assessment. Whenever skeleton crews were on duty, it was always during shift changes, always approved online rather than in person. Secondary pieces, commemorative presents, and items kept apart from the main display rotation are always things that would not be missed right away. They became braver 3 weeks ago, but she turned to a new page. Subchamber 6 contains primary ceremonial pieces, items the Queen wore to state functions. Mara trailed off. How much are we talking about? If every withdrawal using this code represents actual theft, we're looking at systematic looting spanning months, enough to stock a private collection or supply an international auction house. The word Austria had a terrible taste. Same destination as my crate. Maradra strolled over to a machine and retrieved the official timetable for the rotation of crown collections. She perused months' worth of entries. She gave him a close look and said, "Nothing. No exhibition listing, no cultural loan, no outgoing courier authorization. Ellis, Subchamber 6 doesn't store costume jewelry. We're talking ceremonial pieces, handwritten codices, items Elizabeth never even let us digitize." His jaw muscles became taut. Who else has access to that authorization code? She didn't have to mention the name, the Privy Council Logistics Office, or someone with royal household override. Both of them were aware. Maradors slid the ledger across the table after folding it shut. This isn't a clerical error. Renick gazed at the evidence before him. Diplomatic shelter, forged documents, and unapproved removal, all of which were approved under a fictitious name that directly linked Camilla to the incident. It was more than just thievery. Under the guise of sovereignty, it was organized smuggling bound for a distant country, where it would vanish forever. Renick stopped into Sandringham's service gate, the Land Rover's tires crunching on wet gravel. Everything seemed muffled and mysterious because the morning sky had become that certain hue of English gray. He showed the gate steward his credentials from the royal household. Just a routine check-in, nothing official, a peaceful visit that would not result in phone calls or paperwork. The estate felt too well kept and flawless inside. During New Year retreats, Renick had defended these halls which the Queen had referred to as her thinking house. He was aware of which doors needed permission in whispers to open and which wings remained closed. Near the rear service corridor in the lower wing, he discovered Edward Hale rolling linens. Since Charles was still avoiding photographers by utilizing side doors, the elderly steward had been there. Renick remarked nonchalantly, "Heard there were some item withdrawals recently." Hale paused, then said, "Legacy transport. It's a flicker, but sufficient." Renick waited and said, "We don't usually manage that from here." Words weren't always the best way to ask questions. At last the old man let out a breath. 3 weeks ago, external contractors came in, not palace staff. Private companies said they were handling preservation transfer for display purposes, had all the right codes, brought proper paperwork, but they didn't handle the pieces like museum artifacts. No white gloves, no protective linen. They packed fast, worked quiet, used their own containers. Hale lowered his voice and looked around. "I saw one item. Velvet-lined cradle box. Only saw it once before during the Diamond Jubilee." Something chilly settled in Renick's chest. "What about their vehicle?" "Black Mercedes Sprinter, Austrian plates. Left around 6:30 when the light was fading. Asked us to keep the courtyard lights off. Security footage blurred. Half our cameras need servicing anyway. They went straight through the old exit loop. Security didn't flag anything. Unauthorized evacuation under false pretenses. Diplomatic containers, Austrian plates, all concealed behind royal infrastructure that no one dared question. All the pieces fit together with terrible precision." Renick met the steward's gaze directly. "You didn't see anything." "Never do," was Hale's trained bland response. The full force of it struck him as he walked back to his car. This was no longer suspicion. It was evidence, and before it permanently crossed the channel, someone would have to stop it. Colonel Miles Fenwick's office appeared to have been frozen in 1943, complete with leather briefings arranged with military accuracy, fountain pen personnel lists, and wall-mounted timelines. The man behind the desk had eyes that had witnessed enough classified catastrophes to know when another one was about to happen, and a spine that had never learned to flex. While Fennick carefully went through the folder, Renick stood alertly. The only sounds were the constant tick of the wall clock, which marked what might already be the end of the time, and the rustle of paper. Fennick firmly closed the folder after what seemed like 50 minutes had passed. "You're telling me," he continued, "that the Queen Consort is laundering sovereign artifacts through a foreign embassy?" "Sir, I'm stating that 3 diplomatic containers originating from the late Queen's sealed chamber have been loaded onto a diplomatic flight under a private family trust. The only authorization linking them is a pseudonym tied to Her Majesty's personal legal channels." Fennick got to his feet and moved toward the window. Somewhere far below, the noise of London's morning traffic caused his breath to cloud the glass. When he eventually said, 20 years of service without incident. You understand what happens if you're wrong about this? Court-martial, security breach, public disgrace. Rennick's voice remained steady. If I'm right, we lose pieces of the crown permanently. When Fennick turned around, his face was filled with the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who had dedicated his professional life to defending an institution that occasionally needed defense against itself, rather than rage. "You're asking me to greenlight an interception operation against diplomatic cargo, signed and sealed under the Queen Consort's name. Do you have any idea how many protocols that violates?" "Yes, sir. Enough to bury me before wheels up." After examining him for a while, the colonel went to his desk drawer and took out a simple white envelope. He moved it over the table. "What's this?" inquired Renick. "Not from me. Arrived by private courier an hour ago. No return address. No official seal." Renick pulled it open. A solitary card with the words "Come Quiet" scribbled in black ink was inside. He looked up and signed, "A. Anne the Princess." Fennick didn't say yes or no. "There's a corridor behind the greenhouse at St. James's Palace. Discreet entrance. No security logs." The card was placed into Rennick's pocket. Fennick remarked in a low voice, "I can't authorize what you're thinking of doing, but I'm not stopping you either." "Understood, sir." Some conflicts didn't begin with gunfire. Renick reflected as he exited the office. Fennick continued, "If you're going to do this, Sergeant, get there before it becomes irreversible." They began by finding someone who was prepared to write their name on the incorrect sheet of paper. At St. James's Palace, the greenhouse corridor was located between the official and unofficial areas. There were no cameras, no guards, and no documentation of the conversations that took place there. Even in the fall, it had a subtle rose scent, and seemed to be the sort of spot where the true royal business was done. The inner door clicked open as Renick, still in his field jacket, stood beneath fogged glass panels. Princess Anne's gait was not that of a royal. She strode with the bearing of a commander who had gained her position not by heredity, but by skill. There was no ceremony or entourage, only deliberate walking and a wool coat that moved with her. She paused 2 feet away and gave him a close-up look that didn't miss anything. She said, "You've seen it? The paperwork, the movement logs, the video, the actual crate." "Yes, Mom. And it's real." Anne's eyes grew a little narrower. "What's inside?" "I can't say for certain, but the origin point was Subchamber 6, and the withdrawal was signed using a dormant alias, CW22. For a moment, Anne closed her eyes. Something had stiffened them when she opened them. She went to the railing that looked out over the walled grass and said, "Of course it was." There was weight in the quiet between them, not discomfort, but the sort of loading that comes before judgments that cannot be reversed. "We've recovered some things quietly over the past year," she stated. "A portrait here, some letters there. Most go unnoticed because they're not supposed to matter to anyone except us." Renick waited. "But if even one significant piece leaves Crown custody permanently," she said as she faced him, "we lose control of the entire provenance line. The moment it hits foreign registry, it's gone. You understand that?" "I do, Mom." Anne retrieved a thin, unmarked, sealed packet from inside her coat. "This gives you temporary authority to intervene. Not legal cover, not full jurisdiction, just room to act without immediate consequences." Observing the wax seal, Renick accepted it. Intentionally nameless, without a regal crest. "I can't authorize the kind of operation you need, but if you get there first, you'll have protection afterward." "How much time do I have?" Anne looked at her timepiece. "The diplomatic gate cycles at 4:30. You'll have maybe 15 minutes, possibly less. What happens if I'm stopped?" With her hands folded behind her, she took a step back and said, "Then we've already lost more than jewelry." She spoke in a tone that seemed like a collective conspiracy. "Don't try to win the argument. Just get to the tarmac first." Renick touched his temple for a moment. A simple acknowledgement between individuals who knew what duty truly meant, not a formal salute. Anne didn't give it back. All she said was, "Go." As he emerged from the greenhouse, the morning air struck him like ice. A fragment of history was being prepped for export somewhere in London, and he might have 4 hours to keep it from going extinct. The clock had begun to tick. Since their days in logistics at Falkland, Sim Patel had remained the same, quick-witted, wary of authority, and loyal to the wrong people at the wrong times. After passing 3 security checkpoints and 2 customs agents who were too disinterested to pay attention to rules, he met Renick in a side hallway at the diplomatic transfer facility at Heathrow. With anxious eyes, Sim said, "You want me to pull a diplomatic manifest?" "Ellis, you know how far over the line that puts us, right?" "I know exactly how far." Sim drew out a tablet connected to the internal shipping register, wiped his forehead, and sighed. 3 minutes before this pings upstream to people we don't want asking questions." Renick gave him a picture of the serial number on the container. The fingers of Sim swept quickly across the screen before coming to a standstill. He scowled. "Here listed under Albemarle Heritage Logistics. Registered shipper, Lady C. Holiday. Receiving party, Avon Holiday Family Trust, Vienna. Routing through Zurich Diplomatic Wing." He stopped and continued to scan. Declared contents: family memorabilia non-commercial, brooches and household keepsakes. Renick gazed at the display. No gem classification, no sovereign value markers, nothing under 20 kilos coded as archival paperwork, no insurance, no customs review, full diplomatic seal. A code was indicated by a Sim. Exemption flag under Vienna Protocol, can't be opened without violating foreign dignity provisions, and that applies to British heritage. A Sim looked at him blankly. When it's declared as personal gifts and signed off by senior royalty, that's the entire scam, mate. Perfect legal cover. Renick's mouth clenched. "Where is it now?" "Holding Bay 4. Last loading window is 4:25. That plane leaves British soil by dawn, and once it's airborne, it's untouchable." Renick looked him in the eye. "Can you stall it?" Sim didn't respond right away. Then he let out a slow breath. "Maybe half an hour, but after that the foreign wing takes over, and I'm powerless. You'll be standing on an empty tarmac with a disciplinary warrant." "I'll take those odds." Sim grabbed Renick's sleeve as he turned to go. "Just be careful. People who move this kind of cargo don't panic when they're caught. They eliminate problems." Renick forced a smile that stopped short of his eyes. He strode into the wind-whipped pre-dawn darkness, saying, "Then they'd better work fast." He was acting like a man with one shot to halt a crime that the Crown would never acknowledge had nearly occurred. The scent of burnt tires, jet fuel, and what may have been the last vestiges of British dignity being loaded onto a foreign plane filled the wind as it left the ground. With his resolve locked and his ID badge visible, Sergeant Ellis Renick walked across the service ramp. With its rear gate already open, a black diplomatic transport was backing toward the cargo area of a Gulfstream, flying the Swiss flag. With the casual efficiency of those who had done this before, 2 men in navy overcoats oversaw the loading. He didn't make an effort to introduce himself. One handler turned in surprise and said, "Hold that pallet," with trained authority. The other, older, thick-accented and stubbled, stepped forward right away. "Restricted zone, diplomatic cargo. You step back now." Renick pulled out the sealed directive from Princess Anne. "Wax is still intact. This cargo is under review by Royal Internal Protocol. Halt loading until clearance." The messenger gave the paper a contemptuous glance. "This is not official customs. You are not official anything." Renick went over to the box. His documentation matched the serial number. The diplomatic seal was still in place. "Open it." Renick and the container were separated by the younger handler. "Protected material classified under sovereign exchange. If you obstruct a royal protection review on Crown-registered material," with a low voice Renick stated, "you'll answer to more than logistics." Gritting his teeth, the older courier dug into his briefcase and pulled out a printed document that bore Camilla Windsor Holliday's full signature and a note from a legal advisor, confirming that the things were personal gifts with a family connection. The official stamp of a trust in Salzburg. The ideal cover narrative. After giving a nod, Renick used his pocket knife to cut through the wax security strip. "Step back." After hesitating, the younger handler took action. The pressure inside the crate dropped, and the lid hissed. A circular emerald tiara that should have been in the Tower of London, a diamond-encrusted hairpin styled by Fleur-de-Lys, and a ruby brooch that he had personally polished while it was in the Royal Collection's Eastern Gallery. Queen Elizabeth's brooch from the 1975 New Zealand summit were among the 3 items that caught Renick's breath inside, nestled in velvet-lined foam. All of them are unlisted. hidden under bogus declarations, and set to permanently vanish into private collections. He turned on his body camera, took a timestamp photo on each piece, and started recording. This container holds sovereign artifacts under the Legacy Custody Act. These items have never been approved for personal release. The older courier took out his phone, mumbled something nasty in German, and moved away. Renick sensed a shift in air pressure as he entered information into his report binder. They had alerted someone who has the ability to solve this issue, the type that arrived to put an end to matters, not to engage in negotiations. There was a low tire growl on the tarmac, fast-moving black SUV on its way directly to his job. He knew his time was over when those doors opened. The SUV was unable to park. It ceased, abrupt, violent, like a predator who has cornered its victim. Before the engine died, doors flew open. With a fitted navy coat and a silk scarf pulled tight, Camilla came out like a force of nature imprisoned in pricey cloth, moving with the dexterity of someone used to having rooms changed around her. Then came two assistants, a diplomatic attaché and a legal counsel, both holding portfolios like shields. Her heels clicked sharply on the tarmac as she came to a stop 6 feet from Renick. "I suggest you reseal that container immediately." Renick remained still. "Mom, don't." Winterglass shattered her voice. "Do you have any conception of what you're interfering with?" "Yes. A shipment of undeclared crown artifacts being smuggled under false registry using diplomatic immunity with your personal authorization." He could see the controlled rage in her eyes as she took a step closer. "Those pieces were gifted to me. Some before I was even crowned. Household effects that are none of your concern. The emerald tiara was last logged under sovereign custody. The ruby brooch was part of the Legacy Chamber's restricted collection. Neither has ever been classified for personal transfer. You think I care what some guard thinks?" The utterance was acrid. "You polish display cases and salute portraits. You don't understand the difference between inheritance and institutional theft." "I understand theft disguised as heritage," Renick responded with a solid voice, "and I understand that if I hadn't opened this container, those pieces would be in a private Austrian trust by Sunrise, untouchable, lost." Her legal representative came forward. "Sergeant Renick, you are violating diplomatic protection statutes. This cargo falls under Vienna Convention." "No," Renick replied, "doesn't, because it was declared as non-commercial family memorabilia. That classification exempts all personal transfers, except items with institutional provenance, and every piece in that container has provenance you can't erase." Camilla's eyes became narrow and slitted. "You think you're clever? You think your career survives this little performance? I didn't join to preserve my career. I joined to preserve the crown." Like a dagger, silence descended between them. The wind blew. Behind the transport pallet, the courier crew stood still, unaware that this stretch of pavement had turned into a battleground for an institution's soul. Aircraft engines buzzed in the distance. He could see the calculation underlying Camilla's rage as she took a step closer. Her voice trailed off, angry. "Do you think she would have wanted this?" she asked. "Your precious Elizabeth. You think she would have approved of this humiliation, this loyalty theater?" Renick did not flinch as she stared. She was understood without ever having to speak. Her mouth curled, not quite a smile, something sharper than some people's. "Seal the container," she gave her assistants instructions. "We'll address this through proper channels." Renick remained still. An assistant came forward. Subsequently, a faraway subdued engine noise approached with a peaceful authority. Renick looked in the direction of the noise. Another car, a black Range Rover, sleek, unmarked, and traveling with the inevitable flow of judgment. He knew the instant it stopped. Camilla was also aware. Just now the game was altered. Like a period at the conclusion of a sentence, the Range Rover was there, final, unambiguous, and bearing the weight of institutional authority, without having to make an announcement. Stepping out into the wind was Princess Anne, just a black coat, a folded document under one arm, and the demeanor of someone who had spent her life knowing the difference between responsibility and power. No formal attire, no ceremonial sash, and no obvious rank. Before anyone could say anything, Camilla turned. Her aides straightened, immediately conscious that someone who outranked everyone in the room, not by title, but by earned respect, had just reset the hierarchy on this tarmac. They were not acknowledged by Anne. She went straight to Renick. "Sergeant," he said, jolting him awake. "Status: container holds 3 artifacts: emerald tiara, Queen's ruby brooch, diamond pin from the 1975 Commonwealth Registry, all unlisted. No collection registrar approval logged under CW22. With the weight of 70 years of royal history behind her, Anne gave Camilla a single nod before turning to face her. Camilla refused to back down. "This is a misunderstanding. These pieces were legitimately gifted. They're non-catalogued, personal." With little fanfare, Anne opened her folder. There were handwritten ledgers and laminated pages with the signature that had characterized an era, some with faded blue ink margin comments. Each item in that container was listed in her own handwriting. "These," she added, raising her voice to the level of a judge delivering a sentence, "are our mother's personal inventory notes. The transfer of any of them was never approved, not to anybody, not even to you." Camilla's poise faltered a little. "You're speaking from emotion, not protocol." When she spoke, Anne's gaze shifted away from the pages. The peaceful power of someone who had never had to raise their voice to be heard was evident in her voice. Shutting the folder, she turned to face Camilla and said, "No, I'm speaking from memory. Do you remember what Mother said during your first Christmas at Sandringham, about the difference between wearing the crown and serving it?" Camilla's calmness wavered. "That's not relevant." Anne's voice stayed calm, but every word she spoke held the weight of decades. She said the jewelry was never ours. It belonged to the institution, to the continuity, to something larger than personal preference. She wore those pieces not because they were beautiful, but because they represented promises made by generations of monarchs to the British people. Camilla's voice raised a little. "You're lecturing me about duty," she said. "I've worn that crown. I've made those promises. Have you?" Something in Anne's demeanor changed as she took a step closer. It was immobile but not hostile, because what I see here suggests you've confused inheriting responsibility with acquiring property. The ensuing quiet was as tense, certain, and decisive as the instant between lightning and thunder. Anne's voice grew softer but still authoritative as she turned to face Renick. "Complete the recovery." "Yes, Mom." Renick proceeded with silent efficiency, recording the last inventory and securing the container with fresh forensic tags, like closing a chapter in a book that should never have been opened. Anne tucked the updated manifest under her folder after he handed it to her. Camilla remained silent. Not even a threat, not an apology, not a protest. The only thing that moved were her eyes, and there was a dim recognition of a war lost without a single shot being fired. As silently as she had arrived, Anne turned and walked back to the Range Rover, leaving only the sound of history being put back in its rightful place, and the wind, as the final container was removed off the tarmac and rolled in the direction of safe transportation. Renick stayed, unaware that they would be leaving lighter than intended. The airplane engines kept humming in the distance. Cold and honest, the wind stirred once more, bearing the odor of sadness over a nation that had just preserved something it couldn't afford to lose. History was returning home after being taken over. Is it appropriate for Camilla to transfer royal jewelry in her own name? Was it appropriate for Princess Anne to disregard diplomatic immunity? And do you think Queen Elizabeth's jewels should ever be released from the Crown's custody? Leave your comments below. Every comment is read by us. Hit the like button, turn on alerts, and forward this to someone who still prioritizes legacy over title. If you believe that some history should never be sold, press the video that appears on your screen.